Good morning, everybody, or I guess almost good afternoon. It's nice to have you. Thank you for joining. I know everybody's busy with the hopefully getting back to normal after the spotty schedule with the holidays. Thank you, Emily, for hosting and for getting us together. And thank you to the SCA for continuing to make sure that Torah is an integral part of our lives. The topic for our class going forward is going to be Pirkei Abot. I want to talk a little bit about the book as a whole before we begin, as by way of introduction, and then we will discuss the first few Mishnayot, depending on how much time we have. So Pirkei Avot is a volume of Mishnayot. So those are small paragraphs or small learnings that were put together by the Tanaim. And it's called Pirkei Avot for a particular reason, right? Every Masechet, every volume of the greater body of Torah known as Shas, which is Gemara, has a name, and it's usually named after the opening words of the Masechet. Pirkei Avot is different in that respect. It is given the title, which translates into Pirkei Avot, literally translated as the chapters of our fathers, Avot. And that is for the following reason. Pirkei Avot is a book about some of the most fundamental values that we have as a people. It focuses on the rules of interpersonal relationships. It focuses on the tools and skills of personal development. And some of the most famous sayings that you know, like, if not now, then when, or no pain, no gain, come from this Masechet, come from this volume, and they've been adopted by people across the world as some of the most significant sayings and concepts that are out there. In that regard, it's called Pirkei Avot, the chapters of our fathers, for the following reason. These are some of the values that our patriarchs, our Avot, lived by, that made them the people that they were. And these values have been passed down from generation to generation, as we'll see in the opening Mishnah, and they've defined our character. It's also called Pirkei Avot or Masechet Avot because these are the values that parents, that Avot, that fathers and mothers give over to their children, as again our patriarchs did to us. And thirdly, they are the patriarchal values, meaning these are the overarching values, concepts, ideas that define who we are. So the title comes more in this book from the concepts than just the opening of the title. For example, a Masechet Makot or a Masechet Sukkah is called that Masechet because of the opening title or word of the book. This is given the title because of the contents and not because of the opening word. That said, there are 6 volumes of Shas, 6 volumes of Mishnah, right? Mishnah is the original sayings and teachings of the Tanaim, of the major rabbis of that time, that later expanded it to be Gemara, right? There was much later conversation and discussion and expounding of these original teachings by later rabbis, and that is the largest body of literature that we have, called the Gemara or Shas. It's broken up into 6 sections. Masechet Avot, the book that we're going to learn together, finds itself in the volume known as Nizikin, which otherwise is the volume that deals with damages. So you might find in that book, in that volume, the book that deals with damages between one person and the other in terms of my animal caused damage to your field, or there was a fire in my house and it ended up burning down somebody else's field, or we live next to each other and there's damage to my home and it causes damage to your home. Do I have to pay? Don't I have to pay? What if we're partners? So the volume of Nizikin, of damages, generally speaking, speaks about all of the laws of damages, financial and other. Now you're probably asking yourself, if that's the case, why does a book that talks about interpersonal relationships and personal development and some of our fundamental values find itself in the volume of damages? It really has nothing to do with damages. And the answer to that, I think, is twofold. One is, in learning these values, these interpersonal relationship skills and personal growth skills, hopefully they A, prevent one from causing that kind of damage, at least purposefully, and B, if damage is then done not purposefully, owning up to it, understanding that our relationships should supersede the financial damages that may happen from one person to the other, and that the peace and harmony that we can live in as a society transcends the arguments that we may get into in terms of money. That's on the one hand. The other hand is that the people who will be judging the decisions of damages. So I go to court, right? So we had houses, our houses are next to each other. I live in Brooklyn. We have a shared wall. I did some work. The shared wall collapses, and now it causes major damage to your house. I'm going to go to Bet Din. I'm going to go to court. I'm going to sue you. The people sitting on that court, known as the Bet Din, right? The rabbis sitting on that court to make those decisions, before they can render a decision halachically and legally and financially, they need to be versed in the concepts that we're going to learn in our book. They need to understand the human emotions involved in relationships. They need to understand the values that govern relationships. They need to understand the concepts that make us a people and a functioning society before they can render a decision on such a case. As an example, Chacham Ovadia, when he dealt with some of the most difficult halachic cases, he was known as someone who always understood the underlying emotions involved. As an example, there was a case that came to Chacham Ovadia of a woman who in her late teens and early 20s was not a religious woman, and she was living with her boyfriend and she got pregnant, and she ended up deciding to abort the child. She later got married. She found a religious life. She became a religious woman. She got married, and she becomes pregnant with her first child with this religious man that she marries, and she finds out that it's going to be a boy. Now, the husband doesn't know that she was pregnant once before, which would nullify the ability for her to have a pidyon, right? Because you don't have a pidyon if you were once pregnant, even if the child was aborted or there was a miscarriage. You don't have a pidyon because of the fact that the woman was once before pregnant. So the question came to Chacham Ovadia, what should I do? Should I tell my husband and it may damage the marriage? Should we do the pidyon? Should we not do the pidyon? And in a 4 or 5 page discussion, Chacham Ovadia renders the decision that she should not tell the husband. They should do the pidyon. They can make the beracha as though it is their first child, and everything should continue as normal because he understood the damage that it may cause to this woman's relationship. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about for a man who understood the fundamental values and how they interplay when making a decision halachically. So it's this book is found in the volume of Nizikin, because the people who are going to render this decisions for damages need to be versed in these values and concepts before they can render those decisions. That is by way of introduction to the book known as Pirkei Abot. So now we understand why it has the title. We understand the volume of the larger body of text that it finds itself in, and why specifically it is placed in that context. Are we good? Yes, I can't really see anybody. Okay, Ezra, thank you for giving me the thumbs up, so I know somebody's out there. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself. Okay, that said, I'm going to share some sources with you as we navigate this Masechet together. So, Pirkei Avot, and inside look part number 1, we're going to jump into the first Mishnah. So again, this Mishnah is this small teaching or learning that was given over by the rabbis, and this is how our Masechet begins. It reads, Moshe kibel Torah misinai. I'll translate and then we'll have a conversation, or I guess I'll do most of the talking. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moshe received the Torah from Har Sinai. Umisara liYehoshua, he gave over the Torah, not just physically, but abstractly, conceptually, emotionally, spiritually, to Yehoshua. V'Yehoshua l'Zikanim, Yehoshua gave it over to the Zikanim, to the elders. U'Zikanim l'Nevi'im, and the elders gave it over to the Nevi'im, to the prophets. U'Nevi'im isaruha la'Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, and the Nevi'im, the prophets, gave it over to the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, which was the governing body at the time of the Bet HaMikdash. Hem amru shelosha devarim. That governing body, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the last stop, so to speak, that's mentioned in this passing over of tradition, those men said three things. Heve mitunim bedin, you should be patient and deliberate in judgment. V'ha'amidu talmidim harbe, you should have many, many, many students. V'asu siyag la Torah, and you should create a fence around the Torah. Okay, that's a jam-packed Mishnah, even though it doesn't seem that way. And we need to unpack it one piece at a time. So the first thing you're going to notice here, and I'm sure you had the question yourselves, is it says Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe got the Torah from Har Sinai. And Moshe did not get the Torah from Har Sinai. Moshe got the Torah from Hashem on Har Sinai. The way it's semantically set up here, it sounds like the mountain gave Moshe the Torah. The rabbis wrote it that way to give off a message. What message are the rabbis giving off when they say that Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah from Sinai? Again, he got it from God who was standing on Har Sinai. Why write it in a way that says that he got the Torah from Sinai itself? And the answer to that is as follows. As we know, the limud is that Har Sinai was a small mountain. There were much more grand mountains, bigger mountains, nicer mountains upon which God could have given us the Torah to highlight the grandeur of Torah. Nonetheless, he chose a small mountain in the Sinai desert with a message, and that was, if you want to be an ambassador of Torah, the first trait you need to have is humility. Torah is not a tool by which you can put yourself up on a pedestal. Oh, look how much I know. Look at my authority. I can tell people what to do. I can order people around. I know more than you. Torah, in order to be contained in a person and for a person to exude its concepts, a person needs to be humble. When it says Moshe got the Torah from Har Sinai, it means Moshe understood. And we know, because the Torah testifies that Moshe Rabbeinu himself was the most humble man that ever lived. Moshe understood that as the greatest leader that ever lived, the single most important trait that he could have is humility. And in that he got the Torah from Har Sinai, he was able to understand that message in perfect fashion. That being said, it's important to note that the first line of the Mishnah, which gives us the tradition, tells us two things. One is, it tells us that Torah is a misorah. 3,300 years ago, we got the Torah on Har Sinai, and it is the same Torah that we got, and that is a testament to the dedication and the commitment of the Jewish people to pass their values on from one generation to the next. In opening in this fashion, the Mishnah is giving you an imperative. You are the next link in that chain. The Torah can't die with you, chas v'shalom. You need to be the next representative that passes the Torah down to your children. Just as Moshe did to the Yehoshua and Yehoshua to the Zekanim, and so on and so on and so forth. The next link in the chain are the people here in the world today who have to pass it on. Torah lives on the fact that there's a tradition and there's an educative process by which we give the messages over from one person to the next, which, by the way, is why we have the concept of Torah Sheba'al Peh, right? Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah. The 613 mitzvot in the Torah, there are thousands more mitzvot above and beyond those 613 that have become a matter of debate and discussion and conversation, particularly in Gemara. But in the fact that not all of those laws are written in the Torah, we also lost a lot. Right? The Gemara actually tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu died, we lost thousands of concepts. Why would God give us a Torah and make it so part of it is written and the rest of it is oral, passed down from one generation to the next, risking that it's going to get lost? And the answer is because if I put everything in the book, I destroy the educative process. It's a book. Here, it's all there. Pick it up and read it. You read it in your corner, you read it in your corner, I'll read it in my corner. And there's no conversation, and there's no discussion, there's no education, there's no back and forth from father to son, from teacher to student. In order to keep Torah alive and rich and breathing and conscious, he made it so that part of it is written and part of it is oral, so that the conversation and the education continues. So again, we learn the fact that Moshe was humble from the way that it's written. We learn the importance of tradition and our role in the Jewish world as ambassadors and representatives of passing on those values to the next generation from that first line, and why the Torah was given both written and oral. And we also learn the following. Just as Moshe learned that in order to be an ambassador of Torah, he needs to be humble, each of the people listed in this line of transition represent another trait that is needed in order for a person to really be a representative of Torah. From Moshe, we learn that if you want to be a representative of Torah, you need to have a sense of humility. From Yehoshua, what character trait did Yehoshua have? He was Misharet Moshe. He was the unyielding and undying student of Moshe, committed to his every word, learning from Moshe day in and day out. He embodied a sense of commitment with tremendous consistency. If a person wants to be an ambassador of Torah, there needs to be a level of commitment and consistency like Yehoshua. Doesn't mean you have to sit and learn 5-6 hours a day. Most of us can't do that. But every day, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever you can do. Listen to a class online, go on Zoom, read a book, something. But if you're going to be someone who truly represents Torah, it has to be an everyday part of your life. And that was Yehoshua. So Moshe, humility. Yehoshua, consistency and devotion. The Zikanim, the elders. Elders are highlighted by their experience in life. They know more. They're able to do more. They can see things differently because of their experience. If Torah is to come alive in a person's life, it has to be coupled with your experiences. Our experiences, hopefully, teach us, show us the truth of Torah and Borei Olam. You can't tell me that there's a parent who watched their child be born and the miracle of that episode and not see God in that room. Bringing a child into the world is a mind-blowing concept. That experience in and of itself should fill you with a feeling of Torah and Borei Olam. And again, if we're going to be ambassadors and representatives of Torah, we need to see it through our experiences, and we need to be willing to experience Torah through the everyday. And that is the trait of the Zikanim. So humility, consistency, commitment, and this idea of seeing Torah in our experiences. The Nevi'im. The Nevi'im are prophets who God spoke to, and they saw the world through the lens of Borei Olam. They saw the world through the message that God gave them. And that is very important here as well. If you're going to be a representative of Torah, you need to see the world through the lens of Torah. Torah is not a subject that we learn in school. It's not like science or math or history. It's a way of life. And we need to see the world through that lens, and Torah needs to permeate everything that we do. We need to see the world through the glasses of Torah. And if we do that, by the way, then everything becomes Torah. Science is Torah. History is Torah. Math is Torah. English is, everything is Torah if we're willing to see the world through that lens. And that's really what we try to educate our children with when we educate them in school. That everything is part of God's world. Science and Torah are one and the same. and they shouldn't be at odds with each other. They very much mesh, and maybe there are questions and things that we can't answer all the time, but the two are very much part and parcel of the same, and I have to see the world through the lens of Torah, through the eyes of the Nevi'im, if you will. And lastly, Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. The Anshe Knesset Hagdolah were men who took the concepts of Torah and made them as relevant as possible for the day and time that they lived in. Right? They came thousands of years as well after the Torah was given. Things had changed. They needed to make it relevant for the time and the people that they were living in, much like we need to do today. 3,300 years ago, they weren't talking about electricity. They weren't talking about medicine. They weren't talking about euthanasia. They weren't talking about all of these issues. It's incumbent on the leading people at the time to make the Torah relevant, to use the underlying principles to bring it to life in the century and the time of the people that they're living with. And that's now Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. So if you're going to be an ambassador of Torah, you need to be able to bring the Torah to life and make it relevant so that it can answer, and it does, all questions in all times and all places. So we opened the book of Pirkei Avot. In the first line, we had a jam-packed concept. Concept of humility, the concept of consistency, the concept of experience, the concept of seeing the Torah seeing the world through the lens of Torah, and the concept of making Torah relevant. That's how the book opens, and the concept of tradition. Now that we laid that foundation, we have the first teaching of Masechet Avot, and that is as follows. Hem amru shelosha divarim. That last group of people, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, said three things. You should be patient and deliberate in judgment. And I think it's an idea that is very resounding today, because we live in a world where there is no patience. We live in a world where everything is instant gratification. We're expecting results immediately, and if we don't have them immediately, then we lose patience. Right? You deal with young adults all the time. They send you an email. If they don't get an email back in 20 minutes, it's like you're ignoring them. The first saying of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah is everybody's got to take a step back and they got to take a deep breath, literally and figuratively. Literally, again, if you're making a decision, especially if it's a big decision, there's no harm and there's no reason why you shouldn't sleep on it. You don't have to render a decision right now. I want to sleep on it. I want to consult. I want to think about it. I want to explore. I want to consider it for a longer period of time before I give you an answer. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that should be basic practice. Patience, literally and figuratively. Again, this concept of we live in a world today where everything is so fast-paced that we don't have any patience. We're looking for everything to be given to us immediately. Take a breath. Slow down. And I think if we've learned anything in the last 6 months, it's that idea of slowing down a little bit. The world doesn't have to move so quickly for it to actually work. We can slow things down, and the pace can be a little bit slower than we're used to, and we will make better decisions in that regard. So number one rule, have some patience. Be deliberate, be thoughtful, be considerate. V'ha'amidu talmidim harbeh. You should set up a lot of students. Now, I want to finish the Mishnah today. We only have 5 minutes left. I would have read with you the next two sources inside, but I'll do it outside. I think what is being said here is more than just teach a lot of people. And we all teach people in different ways. As parents, we teach people. As educators, we teach people. As businessmen, we teach people. As community people, we teach. Everybody learns from everybody else. But more than teaching people, what I think the Mishnah here is saying is as follows. There is a difference, and this is a point that Rabbi Sachs makes in Parashat Korach. There is a difference between power and influence. Power is when we take the authority that we have and we impose it on other people because we can. I'm the dad, so what I say goes. I'm the principal, so you have to do what I said. I'm the boss, so you're going to follow my instructions. I'm the president, so I get to make the call. That's power, and sometimes it's needed. Because when you're trying to move people in a certain direction and there's pushback, and the pushback is unwarranted or something needs to get done, power is warranted. And in the case where Rabbi Sachs used it, in the parasha of Korach, where Korach was forging a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu had to use his power. God swallow him up and put an end to this. And it was validated. And in that regard, Moshe Rabbeinu used his power as the leader of the Jewish people, which he didn't often do. That's one thing. The second way of leading is influence. And that is very different than power. Influence is not where I impose what I want on somebody else. It is where I stand for something. I have a mission, I have a vision, I am an iconic of certain values. And because people subscribe to those values and see that I stand for truth, I stand for the right things, they then want to be part of my circle and I have influenced them. And then they go and they influence more people. And in that, I can spread my ideas, my values, my impressions on more people willingly. So a teacher that walks into the classroom and says, we're going to do things my way because I'm the teacher and I get to stand up here and tell you what I want, loses his or her students very quickly. But a teacher who gets up in the front of the room and stands for certain values and respects the students and exudes confidence and things that the kids want to be a part of, has now gotten 20 or 25 kids to be part of what he or she wants, and they then spread it out to other people. And that's the difference, as the Midrash writes, between lighting a candle and filling up a pitcher, right? Which is how it discusses Moshe Rabbeinu giving his power over to Yoshua. When I pour one liquid from one pitcher into the other, this pitcher is now full and this pitcher is empty. That's power. I gave it over to somebody else and I don't have it anymore. Nobody wants to follow me when I abuse my power. When I light a candle, the candle I use to light stays lit and all of the other candles are also lit. That's influence. That's the ability to get to a large group of people with the message that I have. And I think that's what they meant here. Amidu talmidim harbe. Do the best you can to lead with influence, not with power. It's true. We all have power in certain roles, and sometimes it has to be used, but don't abuse it. Influence people. Get your kids to do what you want, not because you're yelling all the time, but because they understand that as a parent, you're doing the right thing and you love them. As a boss, get your employees to follow, not because you're threatening to fire them, but because they understand that you have their best interest in mind. You want to influence a lot of people, do it with influence and not with power. And this way your message will spread faster and to a wider array of people. And lastly, Torah, make a fence for Torah. We're running out of time. But essentially they're saying, fall so much in love with Torah that you protect it, right? When we're talking about our kids, we make rules to protect them, even though sometimes they sound extreme. You're not allowed to be out past 12 o'clock. You're not allowed to step foot in the street. Why not? Tell me to look both ways. No, I'm not risking having you look both ways and not seeing the car. I love you too much. I'm making a fence and you're staying behind the fence because I'm not willing to risk it. Same thing here. The rabbis are saying, fall so much in love with Torah that you do everything you can to protect it and make guidelines that keep it as intact as possible so that we, again, can be ambassadors to pass it on to the next generation the same way that we got it. All right, we rushed through the first Mishnah because it was jam-packed. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there's people out there because I'm just seeing blank screens, no people. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you same time next week. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Great
you, Rabbi.
class.
Rabbi.